Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Spicer, Kaplan, and Veselka is a great law firm. It's one of the premier boutique firms here in the Houston area, and I'm delighted to have as a regular contributor on the program Lee Kaplan, who is a partner in that firm and really a partner in our radio program in providing great content and information. Lee Kaplan, as always, good to talk to you, my friend.
Good morning. How are you, Kevin?
Doing great. And by the way, skv.com, as in Spicer, Kaplan, and Veselka, skv.com. Right. You brought up several good topics, and I want to start with the last one you mentioned before we got you on, and if we have time, we'll cover the other two. But a big story that you and I have been covering quite frequently here on the program has been the so-called HERO Act. And talk a little bit about that and what exactly has happened recently about it.
Well, I think this was somewhat of a surprise to a number of people, and it might just be we had assumed that when the district court case was over and the judge found there were not enough signatures that the ordinance would not be subjected to a referendum. But the Texas Supreme Court, in a per curiam opinion, meaning one that was unanimous but not signed by any particular judge, they found that when the city secretary certified there were enough signatures, even though she noted that the city attorney had some disagreements about the petition, that was what's called a ministerial act. Once she did that, the city council had to either repeal the ordinance or put it up for a referendum. And I think this came as a surprise to most people. So right now, there are a lot of political implications to that in Houston. First of all, the ordinance is probably going on the ballot for a vote in November. And second, a lot of people think that will increase turnout for that election by bringing out conservative voters. So you've got advocates of the ordinance who, if it's up for a referendum, as it will be, unless it's totally withdrawn, will be trying to get their supporters of the ordinance to come out and vote. And you'll have opponents trying to turn out the vote. So an off-year election is going to be a lot more heated and controversial in Houston than people might expected.
This is fascinating when you think about it in that context. And by the way, for the listener out there who's not familiar with it, HERO stands for Houston's Equal Rights Ordinance. And what it was is a bill that had, why don't you just elaborate on all that it did?
Well, I don't know all the provisions of it, but it's a non-discrimination ordinance in Houston. And a lot of the debate moved off to whether that meant transvestites would be in bathrooms threatening children and stuff like that.
Right.
But it essentially is intended to be an anti-discrimination ordinance that, say, private employers cannot discriminate in hiring or firing or take other job actions against people based on sex, race, color, ethnicity, national origin, age, family status, marital status, military status, religion, disability, sexual orientation, of course that's what's gotten the most attention, genetic information, gender identity, and pregnancy, and employment, housing, and public accommodation. So obviously what people have focused on the most are sexual orientation and or gender identity.
Yeah, no question about it. And what's interesting about this is now in retrospect, I'm thinking that the mayor probably would have preferred to have done this referendum quite a while ago rather than have it be part of an election that could make it possible for a more Republican mayor. I know we don't run by party affiliations for mayor, but let's face it, we haven't had a Republican mayor, I don't know, maybe since the 60s here in Houston. Louis Welch may have been the last one.
That's right. Politics, Republican Democratic politics obviously come into play in the mayoral election.
Yeah, And we haven't had anyone of a rural Republican leading, in my opinion, since Louis Welch get elected. And that's a long time. And so this could have a profound impact on that.
Right. You're gonna see a higher turnout in November than we would have otherwise expected. It's going to be controversial. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of information and misinformation spread, and every candidate is going to have to take a position on this ordinance, which will also cause some dyspepsia among campaigns and political consultants, and it will make for some interesting talk shows.
Yeah, it will. And believe me, you and I will be talking about it. Anise Parker herself, a lesbian, there was a personal stake in this bill with that. Obviously, do you think she's entertaining just withdrawing it entirely in order to prevent that kind of potential bloodbath in November? What's your gut tell you about that?
I don't know. I can't imagine that she would withdraw it. That would be perceived by many as showing a lack of backbone. I would be stunned, but I've been stunned before, if this were withdrawn. I would think it'll be on the ballot.
Yep. You brought up a couple of other issues in time, of course, it runs quickly, but I'd like you to bring them up because we can always have them on as topics in future shows.
Well, there are two other things that are pretty interesting in the Houston area. One is this Bland case in Waller County where a woman was stopped for not signaling, and the other is I noticed in the paper that a pastor shot a burglar this morning in a church, and maybe it was yesterday morning, and that's the stand your ground law and the extent of it. I guess my only comment about the Bland case is I grew up in Houston, and other than one time being stopped for what I thought fairly dubious reasons in the city of Southside Place, I was told that I had come up too quickly on a stop sign, even though I had stopped at the stop sign. Might have had something to do with the fact I was in a big old white Cadillac convertible and didn't have a shirt off in the middle of the summer. I was coming back from a nursery and had bought a bunch of plants. I think that very few Anglos get stopped for not having a turn signal on. That just, that's bizarre. And so we have a situation where somebody died in jail, not directly because of anything this trooper did, but the stop just seems bizarre, and all the events in the stop seems bizarre, and that ought to be cause for soul searching and hopefully additional training of people in law enforcement.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of odd too. Teenagers will get that too. My kid will come in and complain about that kind of stuff, but she's not a teenager. And, I just thought the entire engagement was ridiculous. I think her attitude was certainly not helpful. It was confrontational, and she would have driven away with a warning. But on the other hand, his decision to arrest her, that just seemed bizarre. It's like, does he live in a vacuum and not know what's happening, in the news world around him? I mean, that's just literally bizarre.
Yeah, everything about this struck me as difficult to understand. Her frustration at being stopped is not difficult to understand, but, we live in an era where law enforcement is asked to do a lot of things, and one thing they just have to learn to do is to de-escalate a situation. He called for backup, and he frankly could have just stood there and waited for his backup. He didn't even do that. Telling somebody I'm going to light you up strikes me as a little over the top.
No question about it.
I don't know, and it indirectly resulted in her death. Why she was jailed, I don't know. I have a feeling that somebody in a similar situation, but white and middle class or upper middle class like me would not have been treated that way.
It was bizarre. And in jail for 3 days, that's the part I found really bizarre.
She couldn't make her bond.
Yeah, I know, but that's just
very unusual.
Very strange. All right, and then on the stand your ground case, I guess you look at it, it looks like it works. Stand your ground works.
The only thing I would say about this is, you see, stand your ground in Texas and about 20 other states. You have no duty to retreat if you're anywhere where you have the right to be present. And Garnet Coleman, a Texas legislator, has tried to limit stand your ground to a place like your own habitation. Now, whether this church is the pastor's habitation, I don't know. But currently in Texas, stand your ground is any place you have a legal right to be present and you feel threatened, you do not have a duty to retreat. That would include a public street. Whereas in some states, the stand your ground rights are only on, say, your own property and particularly your own house. I personally think that there's nothing wrong with our current stand your ground rule, and we're ultimately going to have juries decide whether somebody used common sense in failing to retreat in a place they had a right to be present. And that's what happens, and generally that system works.
Yeah, it does. Lee Kaplan, Spicer, Kaplan of Veselka. Great law firm, by the way, and you can learn more about them at skv.com. Thanks as always, sir. Great job.
Thank you, Kevin. See you in a couple of weeks.
You bet. When we come back, much more for you. I do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com, including this interview. Stay tuned for more right after this.